science enthusiasts. Welcome to Spaces Unleashed. Every week on Twitter, we bring an expert to chat live through the Spaces program. And this is bonus content that goes with the Science Pawdcast. We hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to Spaces Unleashed. This is the audio chat room where normally we interview scientists on Tuesday, but Ryan Jespersen has graciously agreed to be a guest. He runs Real Talk with Ryan Jespersen, which is, I believe it's like in the top of all of Canada podcasts. So, first off, congratulations about that, Ryan. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say thank you. I mean, it's such an honor to be here with you. And with regards to, how the podcast performs or is performing, it's a day-to-day type thing. And we've been, more than 20 times since we launched. We've been number one in Canada. And then there's days where we're not in the top 50. So it keeps us honest, and it's great. And it's all based on things like downloads and chatter and opportunity to get people talking on social media. So it's a real honor, and I'm expecting a lot of fun hanging out with you this hour. This, as mentioned, this is my Twitter Spaces debut, so I'm kind of figuring it out along the way.
That's cool. So we'll hop right to it. And the first one is just for people who are joining, and maybe we got some of your crew that follows you but doesn't follow Bunsen and Beaker. The way we run Twitter Spaces, and Spaces hosts run things however they want, but this is how we run the show. We do a little interview with our guests, and that's so people get an idea of who the person is. We have an international audience with the dogs, and your podcast is actually a big deal in Canada, but maybe people don't know who you are. And then after that, we're going to open up the floor to questions from the audience, and we try to do a little bit of teaching, and I'm definitely a little bit later in the mini interview hoping to pick your brain about how you do how do you craft such a great interview? You've interviewed so many amazing people, and I'm sure some of our Spaces hosts and there's some podcasters in here I see can get some tips and tricks from you. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, right, let's get to it. I'm looking forward to an engaged audience.
Perfect. We have to kind of set the ground rules every time we run these because anybody can join. And then there's just, make sure we don't have any trolls kind of thing. But question is, you've been in media and broadcasting for a while. How did you get into that? Like, this podcast is relatively new for you. What did you do before this?
Yeah, and don't worry about the trolls. I get trolls coming after me every day. I'm used to it, so don't. I mean, as a young kid, I was always fascinated with the art of storytelling. I've told the story before of my chance encounter with Peter Jennings, the great Canadian news anchor that, of course, had a wonderful career, cut short, unfortunately, by lung cancer, but a wonderful career in the United States. And met him at the Calgary Olympics when I was 11 years old. And I've oftentimes looked to that as probably the moment in life where I really sort of became intrigued, where that seed was planted, so to speak. And listened to talk radio in my teens and paid a lot of attention to how stories were told in documentary films, and always was fascinated by local news. I wanted to be a 6 o'clock news anchor. That was kind of my plan. Although I wouldn't say I was too focused. I'm not going to lie to you. In high school, I was still sort of impressionable and open to other things. Long story short, I did a communications degree, and then I did a broadcast news diploma at a polytechnic school. And first job was in newspapers, second job in radio. Then I was in TV for a while. Was able to host ultimately a really fun and maybe even a little bit whimsical morning show called Breakfast Television, which allowed me to get a little bit in a bit of a different avenue than what I was used to, a different lane, as opposed to just journalism and news. more, exploratory and talking about the arts and, doing really creative things to, wake up with people, so to speak, and get people to spend their mornings with us tuned into our channel. And I think that was a bit of a switch flicked for me. It allowed me to develop other skills that included, reading people and interviewing live and reading, body language and speaking pictures to the written word or vice versa, and treating it all like radio as well. You always want someone to put on your morning television show in the background and then go about their routine. So you treat it a little bit like radio too. And all of these, I look back, these are, I was developing skills that ultimately I think manifest themselves in what I did for 6 years as an AM talk radio host with a top rated show in Alberta, in Edmonton, our home city. And then ultimately, after a pretty prominent firing, and we can talk about that if you want, but I was sort of presented with an opportunity to move into the independent digital space. And coming up on a year ago later this month, we did, and it's been really exciting. We've in 1 year built up a really engaged audience, and we've proven that our business model works, and we're growing our platform to include other shows, and it's a really exciting time. So that's my journey in a nutshell.
Ryan, when were you on breakfast television? What year was that? Or years?
So I was officially made host of breakfast television in August of 2008, and I hosted my last show on December 30th of 2014.
You know what?
So I had a 6-year run, and then I launched the.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
And then I was going to say we launched the Ryan Jespersen show on 6:30 Ched. About 2 weeks after that, January 12th of 2015 was when that show went, and that was about a 6-year run as well.
You know what? Because I remember watching breakfast television. Actually, I'm just putting two and two together. That like it was on in the morning, and I would put it on and get some news and make the breakfast and get ready for. Oh man, what was I doing with my career back then? But that's hilarious. I'm so sorry. I didn't even know that was you. That show it was. But that's cool.
But you see, in that kind of, I mean, first of all, that's awesome, and I appreciate that you watched. Those were some amazing years. We were the underdog because we had this kind of hip and irreverent show. But legacy media brands are tough to crack, and so when you're trying to get people to switch to change the channel, it's a lot of hard work, but it was a really rewarding time it was my a real opportunity to learn the art of building a brand and building an audience and growing an audience and carving out room in a media landscape. And so that's what but hey, listen, how cool is it that would have been 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago that you were watching me on that show? You didn't realize it was me until right now, but at that moment, imagine if somebody would have told you that 10 years later, to your 100,000 Twitter followers, you would be interviewing me in a live streaming digital medium about my new project, an instant live streaming show that podcasts around. I mean, how wild is that?
I don't believe what's happening every day when I log on to this Twitter account. It's like pretty unbelievable. Yeah, I would not believe somebody if they told me that.
You have a compelling message and an amazing method with the dogs, and then you have skill with regards to communicating and then promoting it and packaging it, and you've created something that it's no wonder 100,000 people on Twitter alone want to see what you're doing, because you provide value to your audience. You're not trying to ask people to support you because you have aspirations. You're creating content and providing value, and that's why you have such an awesome audience.
Oh, well, thanks, Ryan. But let's on that point, speaking of providing value, let's talk about Real Talk. You mentioned that in your journey. That's the big thing that you're doing right now. Like, I listen to Real Talk every couple days. I try and listen to one of your shows, but you do a show every day, which boggles my mind. I'm just kudos to you. That's a bananas amount of work. But could you talk to everybody about what Real Talk is, like for people who don't know about your streaming show about Real Talk?
Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It's Real Talk is it's news, politics, and pop culture. Like you said, it's funny. I actually read an email on the show today from an audience member that was emailing in to compliment the show, and then to hold my feet to the fire, and which is to me wonderful. That's the whole reason that we're doing what we're doing, is to stimulate people's brains and to dwell in the gray areas and to tackle some difficult subjects and some really fun and silly subjects and stuff that people are talking about, or stuff that people should be talking about. And so there's two ways to look at Real Talk with regards to trying to understand what it is as an entity. On one hand, people will say, technically, yes, it's a podcast in the sense that we podcast it every day, and you can subscribe at Real Talk Ryan Jespersen, and there you have it. But we also stream the show live. And so the show is streamed live from 10:30 Eastern, 8:30 Mountain Time every weekday from our studio. And we go for about 2 hours. Some days we cut it a bit short. Some days we go a bit longer, depending on how the show is flowing. What I took from my time in traditional terrestrial structured AM radio, I took everything that I loved about that, and there's a lot I love about it, and we brought that over to the digital space. And then I took and addressed everything that I didn't like about AM traditional structured terrestrial radio, and we did our best to change it and improve it. And so I'm quite certain that we have a better product than what people are getting on the AM dial when it comes to talk radio. It's a lot more fun. It's more irreverent, gutsy. It's less structured. It's less shackled. And part of the reason, or the reason doing 2 hours live, 10 plus, we say about 10 to 12 hours, sometimes 13, 14 hours live a week, which is a lot, is that we also needed to pilot and ultimately realize that we could fly with an advertising or a revenue model that would allow us to build out a team and build what we're doing is going to be really a network that requires staff across the country. And that's what we're doing. And it's really exciting. But if you're going to roll deep, and if you're going to hire people, and journalism costs money, and people expect quality, and we won't do it if it's not quality, then we need to generate revenue. And so that requires a lot of content and a big audience. And those are things we work hard at every single day.
I love it. I'm just astounded with like when you started, there was no Sarah Hoyle, right? Like Sarah Hoyle is a new addition to your crew.
Yeah.
I love that. I mean, the dynamic that she adds. I think that's cool to have somebody occasionally for you to bounce ideas off of. I like that. What's the name of your tech guy? I forget. I'm so sorry.
So we have Sarah Hoyles and Sam Brooks.
And oh right, yeah. I love that. you sometimes
but
throw
you know
to
what's
him
super
and,
cool
he's
behind
like,
the
okay.
scenes for us? Yeah. Well, Sam is just such a huge talent, and Sarah is just such an incredible producer. They both bring, add a lot to the show and to the production, and it wouldn't happen without them. And then we've got such an amazing team behind the scenes, 9 people every month that we're employing to varying degrees, some of them on contracts and some of them part-time and some of them full-time, that make this thing tick, with the advertising and production and branding and all of the stuff that was so far out of my wheelhouse. I mean, I was a media commentator, right? I was a newspaper scribe turned radio reporter turned television video journalist, VJ, turned live TV host, turned talk radio host, turned whatever I'm doing now, talk host, digital independent media. So nowhere along the way was I figuring out benefits and doing payroll and managing contracts and developing business and generating all that stuff. But it's also added a really exciting element to it. This is the first time in a nearly 20, I mean, a 17-year career that I've ever worked for myself, period. And building something in my mind, a relatively young age, 44, with a lot of runway ahead of us, knowing where people are getting their content. I mean, all of it, like what I said to you 5 or 10 minutes ago about, taking the things that I didn't love about terrestrial radio or structured corporate radio and trying to change it. One of those things is looking in your rear view mirror all the time, knowing that podcasts and streaming audio and all those content creators are coming for you. And at some point, you lose the advantage that legacy branding has given. For me, it sounds like a small thing, but it was an indicator. It was a big red flag for me when Tesla started. You started seeing Teslas out all the time on the street. It was no longer like seeing a unicorn. You see Teslas almost every time you're out on the street, and they don't even have an AM dial anywhere to be found. I mean, that's where it's going. And so, of course, those are the types of things that when you work in AM radio, you're very well aware of. And that's given us reason to believe that, we're not necessarily here at the beginning, but relatively speaking, we might have a bit of a head start on where I think some of my former colleagues and fellow media commentators will be going anyway in the next 2 or 5 years.
Yeah, you feel like it's the blockbuster syndrome, hey?
Exactly. And it's not, I mean, Blockbuster is a great example, but another really good example is the newspaper industry writ large that owned advertising for decades, and then it was like someone was asleep at the wheel. Like, what happened? How did Facebook and Google and everybody else just take such a command on where billions of dollars of advertising investments are being made?
I love that. I actually showed my students. There's these things on YouTube where they're animated bar graphs that grow over time, and it was like the top 20 brands in the United States, and you can all of a sudden the tech giants just wajam just come out of nowhere, and their bar graphs shoot across the screen and wipe out some of the other ones. So I actually showed that to my students a couple days ago, and then you can see Apple was just kind of ticking along, and the second the iPhone came out, it just was brrr, all the way up to number one, like it was a rocket. So
yeah.
Anyway, sorry, I was getting off track there. My other question for you is on your podcast. First off, we'll talk interview skills and interviewing people before we get to maybe some of your favorite interviews. Up in the nest, folks, that's the little thing up at the top of the spaces. I've nested a few of Ryan's tweets, so you can go and check out some of his tweets up there. For those of you who on Twitter, Dr. Glaucomanflecken is a big hit, and you talked to him. Was that today or yesterday?
Yeah, he was on this morning.
Yeah, that's cool. Today. So yeah, I haven't had time to listen to that. I want to, but before we talk about guests, when you are setting up to interview these people, and no joke, you've had some pretty huge people on your show. What's the process to, I guess, have a good interview?
Oh boy.
That's a broad question, I know, but yeah, anything you can help us with there.
That's okay. I ask. Well, and I would say that you just did one of the things that's probably a key to success, which is don't be afraid to ask questions that might come across as too broad or too short or too simple or too obvious. I think that a lot of times an interviewer can get caught, myself included, in getting too verbose, and sort of having these big preambles and trying to ask the smartest questions all the time and try to, create so much background and so much context. And obviously most times context is important for a question, But sometimes the best questions in an interview are, how are you doing? Or you must be tired. Or what is going on? I mean, sometimes those are the best questions. And I mean, I remember when Jay Leno got the interview with Hugh Grant, the actor, after Hugh Grant had been arrested for soliciting prostitution in Hollywood, and he sits down on the couch, and of course that's a huge interview for Leno to get. Of course, everybody wanted that interview, and Hugh Grant sits down, and Jay Leno just goes, "What were you thinking?" And it just brought the house down. And Hugh Grant, actually, if you look, he sort of nervously, he there's this nervous laughter, and he looks down at the floor, and he's quite bashful. And that was like an iconic moment in interviewing, and that was like the most just obvious thing. Jay Leno just said the thing. At the time, Hugh Grant was with Elizabeth Hurley, who was like this supermodel and actor and like this famous, and I understand I'm oversimplifying, but that was the key to a great interview there. Number one, the key is you've got to get the interview. And a lot of times you want to be the first, you want to be the exclusive, you want to be the show of record. I mean, if that's the arena that you're playing in, if that's your genre, if you're news talk or if you're news commentary, being first or getting the interview of record or getting an exclusive is really big and is really important. So number one, you've got to get the interview, and that is a deep we could dive into the deep end of the pool on that. There's a lot that goes into getting those big interviews. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of hustle. There's a lot of networking. There's a lot of connections. There's a lot of trust. There's a lot of track record. And then the interviewee, the person that's joining you, has to trust that the interview will be reputable, and they have to believe that this is the best platform for them to get out their message. Calgary, Alberta's new mayor, Jyoti Gondek, gave us an exclusive, the first big interview the morning after she won in a sort of dramatic fashion in the municipal elections just about a month ago. And she picked our show, and she gave me that exclusive, and it became very obvious in my mind why. About 10 minutes into the interview, asked her what her first business was going to be. What's the first thing going across your desk? And she says, in Calgary, the oil and gas capital of Canada, the new mayor says, declaring a climate emergency. And I went, oh, there it is. And that was that moment of that interview. So I would say don't overcomplicate it. That's probably the most important tip.
I think if we got into the nitty gritties of it, you'd be able to give us like a master class, but I don't think we have time. But that's a good point. Some of my best questions when I've had guests on my podcast are like why do you study black holes, right? Or like just like a big broad question. You know? Yeah. That's great advice, Ryan.
I mean, yeah, I remember, you talk about black holes and hey, I mean, I know that you have a huge science following, that's keen on science. And I've had an opportunity over the years to interview some just marvelous, just really incredible, like everybody knows, like Astro Katie, she came on the show a while ago. I mean, I had a chance to sit down with former Commander Chris Hadfield, and what a wonderful conversation that was. And the questions, I mean, you can ask these people who are really skilled communicators, some really technical and cool stuff, but asking Chris Hadfield, like, how old were you when you first dreamt of going to space? And he just goes back to his childhood. And also, let's be honest, the key to a great interview sometimes is the skill of the person being interviewed, because I bet you that 1,000 people have asked Chris Hadfield that question, but he still finds a way, recognizing that there will be audience members that are hearing him speak for the first time, or the first time candidly like that anyway, that they'll deliver in a way that still brings a lot of enthusiasm to it. But, you pull an opportunity to ask. As an interviewer, you have to remember you have this privileged position where you are asking, or your job is to ask the questions that the audience most wants to hear, and to come up with a couple questions that nobody would have thought of. And that's what I challenge myself to do every single interview. I remember talking, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, came on our show. It was his first ever interview with an independent podcast, unbelievable for us. And it was the day after the federal budget came out. And it just so happened to be April 20th, 420, which is, a big day on the calendar for cannabis enthusiasts. And if you're not a big cannabis enthusiast, you have no idea what 420 is, and you wouldn't think of it. It wouldn't cross. And so I didn't lead with it, but as one of my last questions for the Prime Minister, I noted that it was 420, and I said I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the Prime Minister that legalized cannabis in Canada for 420. And he bursts out laughing. And he says, believe it or not, I've been in briefings all day. I've done, many conversations and talked to so many people, and no one, he said, believe it or not, you are the first to bring up 420. And that was kind of that moment. Maybe it wasn't the most cerebral moment of the interview, and it probably wasn't, the most politically interesting moment of the interview, but it sure was different. And that's what we take from that interview to promote it. We get something out of our interview most other shows don't.
It was a very real human moment, which is important.
And I also think your podcast is aptly named Real Talk, because your passion is so evident, and it's real talk, but it's also real you. And it's a product that you are incredibly of, and I think that just emanates throughout, and this really draws people in.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and that's that's part of it. And I can think of moments where I've really sort of, just this, I don't, depending on when people hear. Oh wait, can you only hear Twitter Spaces live, or will people be hearing this later?
You have the option to record it. I can get the data from Twitter Spaces, and I'll send you the data if you want it. But I won't have that for have it for a week. But it's kind of cool. It's kind of a live thing right now.
Okay, cool. Well, then I can speak without time stamping this, so to speak. As a note of interest, that's something we have to be aware of when we do shows on Real Talk. Is I recognize that the way that people go get content. We did a roundtable the other Friday, a few Fridays back on ADHD for ADHD Awareness Month, and we talked about neurodiversity. And I realized that the majority of people that see that over 2 years or 5 years. Whether they download it wherever they get their podcasts or whether they go to our YouTube channel, they will probably not be listening to it on the day it was recorded. So I try not to time stamp the shows too much, but here I can do it. So back to my original point. Just last Friday, I had a moment of what can I say? A moment of candor. I was irritated at some political realities in our neck of the woods, and I spoke quite frankly with some salty language. And I don't do that all the time, which is what I think makes it more significant when I do. And with regards to keeping it real. We've had moments on the show where I've been really proud of things I've said. We've had moments on the show where, I've said things that have not resonated very well with people, and they've been in touch with us. And in those circumstances, I can think of at least two off the top of my head. The very next day, we've brought those people on to talk about and to have dialogue around why they weren't thrilled with what they heard the day before. And I think that those are the really special moments. And I think, sometimes, not to sound too sort of, Pollyanna, but maybe we've lost our ability a little bit to dialogue and to meet people where they're at, or to meet in the middle, or to be open-minded, or to eat, have a slice of humble pie every once in a while, or to speak truth to power every once in a while. And we want Real Talk to be known as a home for that. And that's a commitment we make, and we try to practice what we preach.
What a great answer. Wow. So you're saying that maybe, unlike certain people you're a little bit upset with a week ago, the ability to point out when maybe you've been a little bit wrong is important.
Well, sure. And I'm not like, I mean, ask my wife, like I'm wrong all the time. I mean, and it's a thing. It's an interesting thing too, to be in this line of work in news commentary, especially live, where things will happen. And sometimes, something may strike you a certain way initially, and then maybe you change your mind on it later upon reflection. And I've always, I don't know, maybe it was the way I was raised, or maybe the influence of important people in my life, but I've often thought that, we talk about politicians flip-flopping, and that does happen, and that is an issue, and I'm not necessarily excusing that, but I think into changing your mind every once in a while and talking about it and talking about the process. Let me give you a classic example. I mean, how many shows have I done? I mean, including radio. How many shows has anybody in journalism or media done on, COVID-19 in the past year and a half or to 2 years? And how many interviews have we done about vaccines and vaccine hesitancy and vaccines with pregnant women and vaccines with seniors and vaccines with kids? And I think that you get to a certain point where the majority of people, probably almost 100% of the people that are going to be listening to this, if you have an audience keen on science and fact and evidence, there remains among us an element of the population that's either vaccine hesitant or anti-vax, and I've really struggled, to be honest with you, with carefully administering my opinion, because I can get frustrated. And in some cases, when I hear that children's, access to healthcare, children's hospital beds, children's surgeries, brain tumor surgeries, cancer surgeries, hip replacement surgeries, and other surgeries are being postponed in some cases by more than a year, because ICUs are jam-packed with people that are unvaccinated, I get angry. And I also recognize that oftentimes it's our job to try to understand people, to seek to understand, as Stephen Covey writes. And so I haven't figured it out. You can probably tell by the way that I'm dancing around a direct answer here, but I do think that it's important to find that fine line, or to pick your battles on the times where you seek to understand people and remain open-minded, and other times when you take a very firm position on something and really sort of use your blowtorch. Those moments when chosen wisely can have a lot of power.
Yeah, we struggle with the whole vaccine thing on our account. Every time I post about vaccines, it's better now, but before, every time we would post anything about vaccines, oh man, we had to block people. We got hate messages. I can't imagine what your show gets on a daily basis, but like we're a cute dog account. Like, it was kind of shocking to start with, and it's tough after that to and try to keep explaining the science. So I hear you, Ryan.
Well, one of the things that's kind of funny, I don't hear from as many haters now as I did before. I mean, I still hear from some, and on Twitter and stuff like that, or I'll get the odd email, but way more on radio. Now I kind of laugh. Like, if I'm really bothering you now, first of all, let me say, I always want to hear other sides of the coin. I always want to hear people's opinion. I appreciate critical emails very much, and if they're respectful, and then that's even better. But now I kind of chuckle. I'm like, if I'm driving you crazy still, you had to come seek me out and find me. Like, you're downloading my stuff to drive yourself crazy. So I maybe have a little bit less sympathy.
That's a good point. Instead of being like stuck in a truck and that's the only station they get.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I got it. Okay, 2 quick questions, Ryan, before we open the floor for questions, because that's a big part of Spaces. If you're just joining us, we have Ryan Jespersen, who runs a top-rated podcast streaming audio program in Canada. And we're just talking about what makes a good interview, talking about his podcast, and I guess some other amazing stuff. So the last 2 questions, one of them is, do you have like a favorite guest that you've interviewed? Maybe like top 2 or 3 if you struggle to find. I'd be curious.
Yeah, I mean, this is always a hard question to answer, because we get into really compelling conversations about stuff that really matters and is really interesting all the time. So yeah, I know that I should give you an answer, but it's tough to say, because I think every interview, sometimes assuming interviews, or the people that most audience members have never heard of before are the greatest interviews, because it's just people speaking frankly about their own personal experience. We sort of walk a mile in their shoes. And then there are the big hot shots. We haven't yet announced who the two guests are on our 1-year anniversary show coming up on November 23rd. But I'll tell you, we have a couple of enormous, with regards to prominence and stature, in my mind, one of the more brilliant people on planet Earth. And another one of our guests, probably the most accomplished and fiercest representative of her profession in the country. So I'm looking forward to that. Let me ask me to answer this question after November 23rd, and I'll see if maybe I can pin down a certain specific name.
All good, Ryan. I would be hard pressed too with the guests I've had on my podcast. They're just, every scientist I've interviewed is just so fascinating. It's mind-boggling, actually. The last question, I would be, as you say all the time on your podcast, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about dogs. You have a lab named Monroe, is that correct?
That's right. We have a 2-year-old black lab. Her name is Monroe, and she's such a good girl. And we have a 9-year-old boxer named Moses, who is the most handsome boy you've ever seen.
I love it. You also do a bunch of like outdoorsy stuff with your family too. I love seeing your pictures. You do like off-road stuff in vehicles or something like that. I swear I've seen a couple pictures. Yeah. That looks a lot of fun.
Well, we do. Yeah, we love. I mean, we interact with the great outdoors in a number of ways. We love backpacking and hiking, and I'm a pretty keen angler. We love nothing better. We just take our backcountry rods and do some spin casting in the alpine lakes. And I mean, it's just that's a great day in my mind. And yeah, you're right. Our family, we build and wheel Jeeps, and we have a great time out there. And of course, I encourage and we live and practice a balanced and respectful approach to off-roading and in off-road areas. And we're proud to do, cleanups in some of those areas and observe the riparian zones. And I think that it's important to have those conversations. If people want to talk about sustainable recreation, we're going to have to change the practices that we've seen in many circumstances. And that includes fishing. It includes, to a certain degree. I won't speak to what I don't know, but certainly, with regards to trail maintenance and off-roading and camping. And I think the more that we prioritize and really work to preserve the natural resources that we have, the longer that our, subsequent generations will be able to play out there like we're lucky enough. So that's a top priority for us.
Well said. Yeah, Alberta is just so beautiful. I can't imagine a place like where we live that is just messed up because of people's actions. So I agree there.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to our show week after week. If you want to know how to support the Science Pawdcast, here are a couple ways. It's always going to be free to download, so you'll never have to worry about paying for it. But, things do cost money running a podcast, and here are a couple ways you could help us out. One is join our Patreon page. It's amazing. It's growing. It's almost like an extended family. There's multiple tiers of support, and we have lots of fun perks for being part of our Patreon page. The other way you could support us is giving us an awesome review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, anywhere you can rate our podcast. Give us a great review. The third way you could support the show is checking out the BunsenBurnerBMD.com website. We have awesome merch there. We worked really hard finding quality merchandise that's comfortable with vibrant colors. So 3 ways to support us: the Patreon page, 2, give us a great review, 3, head over to our merch stop and see if there's anything there you'd like. Thanks, everybody.
All right, so we're going to open the floor to questions. So this is the Q&A part for Ryan. If you have a question for Ryan, you can request to speak and then ask away. If you're shy and you are not comfortable asking a question with your own voice, you can direct message me and I'll try my best to weed through the weeds and get the question to Ryan. We'll go to Kiki. Kiki, you're up first, and Paula's second, and Tracy, you're on the wings. Also, if I don't know who you are, I will kind of like snoop your pro to make sure you're not a troll. Okay, go ahead, Kiki. You've got a question for Ryan?
Yes. Hi, Ryan. Thank you, Jason, for inviting me up to speak. I don't. That's the first time I hear about your show. I'm not Canadian. I live in New York. I'm Greek myself. So even if I lived in Canada and I was an immigrant, I still wouldn't have known of the show because there are cultural references even in the United States that I'm not familiar with, like the Brady Bunch. I have no clue what everybody's talking about. So yeah, it's the truth. Like it's cultural relevance on the side of an immigrant. I can tell you all about it. I have stories. But with that being said, since you are thinking about expanding and inviting people and making this more into a company, and you're basing this in Canada, are you considering moving forward, branching out to the United States, maybe becoming international? I mean, you can be the CNN of audio social media. It's just a thought as you were talking. I was just thinking, oh my God, that would be great if you could just, expand and just break the glass ceiling. That's my question.
Well, Kiki, I so appreciate the question, and I'm thrilled that you're tuned into this. Let me tell you this. I'll answer the question, or at least I'll start in a bit of a different angle than you might expect, and that is just to let you know how much I hate you, maybe even inadvertently nudging me. This has been to be honest with you, perhaps the greatest challenge. And I described it yesterday to our managing director who works for us out of Vancouver. We have team members in Vancouver, Edmonton, and Calgary right now in Western Canada, and we'll soon be adding some in Ontario. I said to him, my most prominent insecurity early in my career as an entrepreneur is that the doubt around whether or not I am the biggest hurdle standing in the way of the company's growth. In other words, am I too involved in things that I have too little experience in, or if I were to invest in or bring on other people to take a stronger role in developing the business side of expansion, as an example, might we grow this quicker? And I think, what you're talking about is so very realistic. The barriers to entry in what we're doing, you referenced CNN. Any news outlet, no matter where you are, is tens of millions of dollars to establish, hundreds of millions if you're talking, if not billions, if you're talking about national or international organizations. Now, from a startup standpoint, with regards to independent journalism and crowdfunded journalism and digital streaming media and everything else, the startup costs are so negligible, relatively speaking, that expansion, never mind the digital age and the gig economy and so many other things that are changing business, things are possible now that would have been impossible as recently as 5 or certainly 10 years ago. So I wouldn't rule anything out. I love what you're getting at, and I think that we've set a goal. So we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary. Our goal in year 2 is to expand in a way that people will start to really recognize first across Canada what we're doing by making a splash. I think we're set to make a couple big splashes in year 2, and I'm really excited to see where this is 3, 4, 5 years from now.
All right, great question, Kiki. Thanks, Ryan. That's I'm excited for you. That's so cool. That's amazing. We'll throw it over to Paula. You're second, and Tracy, you're up next. If anybody else would like to ask a question, you can request to be a speaker. Go ahead, Paula.
Hi. Good evening, everybody. And hi, Jason. Thank you for taking my question tonight, too. Hi, Ryan. Nice to meet you. And on a funny personal note, I don't have a dog named Monroe Moses, but I have a father-in-law named Monroe Moses. But anyway, because you said you had 2 dogs.
Wow.
I know, that's pretty funny. But I was wondering if there was a guest that you haven't interviewed that you would like to, because I live in the States. I come from Connecticut, but boy, I wish you would definitely think about doing something down here too, because this is such a landmine of politics and everything going on here. I'm sure But is there somebody that you haven't interviewed that you would really like to? And you know.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the question, and that's uncanny about name. That's amazing. I'm going to be honest. I know I'm being annoying right now and not saying who we have on the show coming up on November 23rd, but that's going to tick one of those boxes for me, to be honest with you. It's somebody that I've been wanting to interview for years, and I'm really excited that it's happening on November 23rd. So people will be able to check that out. You know what? I feel like I want to give you an answer that's not obvious, because some of my, I would love to interview former President Barack Obama. I would love to interview Elon Musk. I would love to interview Mick Jagger. I would love to interview some of the all-time greats in sport. I'm a real sports fan and a fan of the arts. So certainly, there's a list like that, but oftentimes for me, there's a real privilege that comes with access to people's perspective and their experience and their honesty. And I don't know why, right now that I'm getting this name is popping up in my mind, but this girl named Rachel, that nobody here will know, and that's the whole point. Agreed to an interview. This would have been about 2 years ago. This was back on my radio show, and she was a daily visitor to a supervised consumption site, to the needle exchange, and healthcare workers are there to supervise her injecting herself with drugs. And she communicated through one of the staff members at the supervised consumption service that she would be willing to do an interview with me and talk to me about it. And, in the interest of changing some stigma and addressing some issues that she thought were relevant to big conversations, prominent conversations about public policy and the opioid crisis and things like that. And I'll tell you that the half hour that I spent interviewing her, she was speaking so frankly and so openly about her drug use and what drives it, and whether or not she ever wants to quit, and why the supervised consumption service is valuable to her, and talking about overdosing and being brought back to life, and pain and trauma and racism. And I mean, I'll tell you, an interview like that is one that changes you forever. It changes your perspective. It changes your levels of empathy. And so I feel like, there's big, prominent, big names I'd love to get to interview. And some I've ticked off. I always wanted to, interview Slash from Guns N' Roses, and did that, and I was able to interview Jay Leno and did that. And Peter Mansbridge, a legendary Canadian anchor. I spoke to him, I guess, about a month ago. So those are the big ones. But for me, every once in a while, the really special ones, bad golfers like me will know what I'm talking about. If you can hit one great shot every round, you'll keep coming back. And it's the same thing for me with those kind of sleeper interviews where you don't really see them coming. They might be good, but you don't necessarily know that they're going to be one that's your life. And if you get those every once in a while, those are the ones that make this career really special.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you very much, and continued success to you.
Thank you. I appreciate you listening.
I grew up with the Oilers dynasty winning all of those cups, Ryan. So I was pretty jealous you got to talk to Mark Messier.
Yeah, that was a fun conversation. We didn't have too much time with him because he's, of course, doing his book tour. So he's doing a lot of interviews. But the one thing I wanted to make sure I asked him about was what turned him on psychedelic mushrooms, and what's his perspective on the future of psilocybins and psychedelics and all of that when it comes to mental health and when it comes to, some brain trauma and even just leadership and opening up your mind and being creative. He maybe wasn't totally, of course, he's Mark Messier. So he said, I'm not going to condone any illegal drug use and all that. But he spoke a little bit about his time in the tropics, enjoying that experience. And, you always want to find something a little bit different. You always want to find something that's interesting, especially when you're doing an interview with somebody that's going to do 20 interviews across North America that day.
Gotcha. All right. Thanks for your question, Paula. Tracy, over to you. And then Clint, you're on deck. And Golden Retriever Channel, you are in the wings. Go ahead, Tracy.
All right. So these are just kind of statements. Ryan, I think that's awesome that you have a black lab because they're my favorite. And Jason and Chris, I just want to thank you for the postcard that I got. I don't know how I was going to be able to do that, so I just wanted to do it here real quick.
You're very welcome.
No problem. Thanks, Tracy. Did you have a question or was that it?
No, that was it this time.
Oh, okay. That's perfect. All good. Thanks, Tracy. Okay. Over to Clint, and then the Golden Retriever channel dropped down. So Clint, go ahead.
Okay. Hopefully Ryan remembers this because we used to work together. But what was your most favorite interviewer that you got to play drums for?
Yeah. Hey, what's up? It's great to hear you. Yeah. Well, I can only remember unless memory fails me, but I can only remember playing drums live on set for two musicians. And those would be country singer Brett Kissel and Canadian rock and roller Serena Ryder. And I would say, I mean, obviously mad respect to both of them and they're both great, but playing drums with Serena Ryder was something that I'll never forget. That's for sure. Both of those were really special experiences though.
Yeah, that was a cool moment. We were all in the studio and then everything just happened organically and we all kind of just sit there and said, wow, did that just happen?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. We were just joking around, and I was just, I'm kind of like, what would you call me? Like I'm a casual drummer. I can keep a beat, and I can kind of like sit in, that sort of a thing, and give the band like a really basic sort of, beat from the back. But of course, she's amazing, and she just started. As you'll remember, it was a sound check during a commercial break, or maybe it was before the show. It was early in the morning, and she was just strumming, and then I just sort of started hitting the bass drum and the toms with her, and then it just kind of broke into this moment, and I was thrilled, of course, that our amazing team in the control room was rolling on it, and a couple people really did me a solid, and we're sure to snag a couple photos of it, and to be honest with you, I watched the DVD of that. My mother-in-law is hilarious, and she's just such a huge support, and she asked to see it a while ago, so we dug out the DVD and watched it, and I got a kick out of it. I guess that was probably about 10 years ago.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So we'll be looking for more drums on the Real Talk with Ryan Jespersen show then?
Oh, yeah. Well, hey, I'll tell you this. Our little guy, he's 6 years old, and once a week he goes to drum lessons. So, there's a drum kit downstairs that's had a little dust on it, and so we'll have a next generation that'll probably play a little bit better than his dad does.
Awesome. Good for you, and best of luck, man.
Thank you. It's really nice to hear your voice.
So I didn't know this, Ryan, but the air drumming that you do on set is based on factual drumming.
Well, yeah, I always joke around. I always joke around with the team that I always say, hey, I'm one of, like not every air drummer can say this. Like, put it this way. When I play air guitar, if you actually put a guitar in my hands, it would sound horrible. It would be ridiculous. It would be disjointed and make no sense. And I always joke with my friends. I say, if you actually put it in front of me while I'm air drumming, it would actually probably sound pretty good.
I've put in the nest above. Somebody took some screenshots during Real Talk of you air drumming, so folks can take a look up there.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a good chance for me to plug somebody, a group of people that have been amazing to us. When people check out Real Talk, even if it's for the first time, you're going to hear a great soundtrack, some great music that we're lucky enough to use under donated license from Fallen Tree Records. The band is Aok and the Soundmen, and the album is Desolation Sounds, and it's in my mind it was the album of last summer across the country. I love the tune that we use as our title track, and we're really grateful for that. So they've inspired my air drumming.
Yeah, it's catchy. Yeah, it's a great song. or the album. Well, the intro is great too. I love it. All right,
Yeah, and you know what was cool for them? They made a very special to us. As a matter of fact, their drummer did, a guy by the name of Chris Sturwald. When I was able to to announce that we had hit our 3 millionth download, which was an exciting moment for us, he reached out to me and he goes, of course, that means that our song has been heard 3 million times. And he said, that's just unbelievable. So it's been awesome for us to be able to hopefully provide some exposure for their music after they so kindly allowed us to use it, under license, which was really cool to the gates.
all right. That is cool. That is cool. It's a great partnership. Or partnership, as we would say with the paw. Partnership. There we go.
Yeah.
Speaking.
You know what? If we really both you and I, if I'm going to criticize that, you got to go back. One of the other keys to being a great interviewer is from time to time, you have to air check yourself and you have to go back and you have to be critical of your interviews. And you have to be tough on yourself and you have to do better and improve. And you have to, I can think of some interviews I did last week where I was really hard on myself after I was like, I missed obvious questions. I missed windows of opportunity and that's how I get better. So here's some criticism for both you and me tonight. We have not had nearly enough dog puns.
I agree. That's our bread and butter too. Well, speaking of dogs and puns, let's go over to the Golden Retriever channel. What are you digging up over there?
Hey, nice to hear you guys tonight. I only got in on part of the interview, but Ryan, I have a question for you. Yeah, I'm living under my Golden Retriever MO here on Twitter, but I'm a policy analyst in DC. This is how I keep my head together. And I'm curious to know, you mentioned President Obama as a cool interview for you. If you had to think of it, what would be your biggest policy concern for Canada, the United States, period, right now? What's your biggest policy concern, and who would you want to interview about it?
Oh man, that is a really great question. I wondered if maybe you were going to ask me about my biggest policy concern with President Obama. That would have been. I sometimes wonder. This is not. I don't mean to be like glib about this, but I think a lot of people point out that Obama at that term in his as president had ordered more drone strikes than any other president in American history. I mean that's a fact. It's also true that drones were not utilized as much before Obama. So there's a bit of an asterisk on it. But I think the premise is that maybe Obama gets a bit of a pass on some of the more gnarly and uncomfortable elements of decisions that presidents make. And I would really like to dig in on that. And I would like some candor there from a guy that's very affable and likable, and he's a great communicator. But I'd like to ask him some questions along those lines with regards to policy concerns. Canada and the United States right now, it's interesting to see what sort of an impact the COVID-19 is going to have on things like international investment and international trade. And it was interesting to see, obviously under the previous American administration, but the NAFTA 2.0 or whatever you want to call it, the Mexico, the free trade agreement now, that was kind of interesting to see as well, trend wise, which is happening to some of the more, the industries that are maybe more impacted by things like protectionism. Some of the tariffs have been really, I think, debilitating to certain elements of industry, supply chain, things. I mean, there's always tension around things like dairy, but aluminum and lumber, and there's a lot of implications there, I think. And Canadians have always seen Americans, I think, as obviously an ally and a close neighbor and a sort of a number one, kind of like you'd like to think your best friend to a certain degree. And I think that things happened over the last number of years that have maybe, influenced people's feelings on that. And some of them are politically and partisan related. A lot of it had to do with Donald Trump, but a lot of it didn't. A lot of it has to do with global economic activity and trends, and corporations and governments serving their best interests, and sometimes that comes at the expense of people's perceptions of what international relationships mean, or what they look like when the rubber hits the road. And so I'm really curious to see how the pandemic and these past couple of years and these big disruptions will influence that. And it's always interesting to see things like, different policy. I mean, the U.S.-Canada border has been essentially closed to normal travel a long time, and what influence does that have? What does the United States do on the cannabis file when Canada has got a few years under its belt now with legal cannabis, and you look at these billion and potentially $1 trillion revenues of that crop, and you look at even the cannabis crop in the U.S. now as it stands. I think it's top 5 with regards to the economic activity that it spurs, which is huge. And that's with the federal government that's, even under a Democrat, doesn't appear to be overly open to sort of looking to what that so-called the other green economy could look like. So, does that cause tension between Canada and the U.S.? And what does that mean with regards to border security? And I guess what I'm exhibiting here is I could probably go on, and let alone if you and I were talking, you as a policy analyst in DC, we could probably talk all night.
That's absolutely true. And I think Obama would give you a fair shake on drones. Actually, I think he'd be pretty straight up about it, just as an aside. But yeah, you got all the biggies out there. So interesting. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you for the question and the engagement. I appreciate it, and I think that Obama is one of the most skilled commentators and public speakers that I have ever seen. And I know that what I'm saying is not profound. I'm not suggesting that I'd be able to back him into a corner on an interview. I just like to really get into it. But I suspect you're right. I think he would take that question head on, and I think it'd be really interesting to hear him answer it.
Yeah, like I said, you'd have a very interesting interview on your hands. It'd be a good time. And I think you get a lot of straight stuff out of him. Thank you very much, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you bet.
Ryan, we're at the top of the hour, and I want to respect your time. There's 3 more people that have questions. Do you have another 10 minutes, or do you have to go?
Yeah, let's take those 3, and then we'll thank everyone for their time.
You're all right with that? Okay, perfect.
Yeah, totally.
Okay,
totally,
so the 3 speakers left. I forget what order they went in. I'll go to Nate first, and then Blue, and then I think Team Dog. So Blue, Nate, you're up first. Nate Seiler. How's it going, Nate?
Oh, it's going great, Jason. And Ryan, it's great to get to talk to you one-on-one. I've enjoyed, Ryan, listening to your show for the last year, and of course, Jason, listening to your show for the last many years as we've worked together. Ryan, what I really want to ask you about today, I mean, I don't want to delve into details about your personal family, but you mentioned you have a 6-year-old son, so I know you at least have one child. And just the way that you're so transparent and blatant on your show, I would love to hear you speak as a parent how you feel about sending your kids into a school that is going to have to facilitate the K-6 curriculum this upcoming September. Like, do you have...
Oh, man.
I know you only have 10 minutes and you have 3 questions left, but...
Yeah, what are you doing?
I'm sorry. I had that question and then I'm like, oh, it's 10 minutes, 3 questions. So can you just speak as a parent, I guess, how you feel? Or do you have the confidence in us? I work with Jason as well. But do you have the confidence in educators that it doesn't matter what curriculum we're facilitating, that we're going to make your kids enjoy school?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess for context for people outside of our neck of the woods, there's is it fair to call it a controversial curriculum rewrite that's been undertaken by a partisan, ideologically driven right-wing conservative government that educators and curriculum experts are en masse. I mean, describing as setting the clocks back 30 years, if not further, and anti-evidence and politically driven, and it's a total disaster. People can check our archives on Real Talk if they want to really dig into this. I think we've had some pretty amazing conversations about curriculum by some people, educators that really care and that we're really lucky to have. You know what? I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. I'm going to dodge the question a little bit, but also hit it head on if that makes sense. And all I will say is this. Is that last night my wife and I actually had our parent-teacher conference, virtually. Great. With our little guy's teacher, and he's just a gem, this teacher, and his competence and his insight and his skill and his passion for his craft was very evident in the short time that we had with him, and our son is just really appreciates him, and I have no doubt. I'm the son of a teacher. My mom is a teacher, and so I have a great respect for educators. As a matter of fact, we haven't announced this yet, but because it's kind of announced isn't the word to use, but we just received a recognition from the Alberta Public School Board Association for our commitment to public dialogue and coverage of media, our media coverage of education in the province, which is a very meaningful thing to receive. We just received that. So I care very deeply, mostly because you're right, because I'm a dad. And so, of course, I believe that some of the best and brightest are called into education. And I look at the courage that educators, teachers and principals and administrators in some circumstances have shown in going on the record on shows like mine and speak against this and refusing to test draft curriculum and really, holding the government's feet to the fire, in some cases at risk of malicious consequence from a government that's really not, I wouldn't say operating under what people would describe as a normal standard operating procedure. It's a really difficult government to understand. And so, I have faith in that, but yeah, I'm concerned. And I believe that it's going to be up to teachers and up to parents, quite frankly, and people that loves in these students to make sure that their heads are screwed on straight when it comes to being able to, I think develop some of the skills that are most important right now, which really has nothing to do with, I don't want to get into this. I'm not an educator and I want to know I want to know my role here, but I think one of the key skills that everybody needs to learn, maybe most especially young people, is how to discern between reputable information and information that doesn't deserve 5 minutes of your time, and how to understand credibility, and how to understand, valid sources, and how to understand, I hate the phrase, but fake news and all that kind of stuff. And I think a big part of that starts at school and it starts at home. And so, of course, it becomes more personal when you have a little one in school. That's for sure.
Well, thank you very much. I think you hit it there, Ryan, in that you're saying, I like how you just kept repeating the word skills. And that's exactly what we have to send out to our parents.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, when it gets to high school, Ryan, if it's a mess, I'm going to straight up just teach what I want to teach. So anyways, I'll teach what I know to teach, to learn, sorry. So the government's not listening to this. So we'll throw this over to Blue. I think Blue has a question.
Well, Blue doesn't really have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. I'm not good with this technical phone stuff. Anyway, I wanted to comment that have never heard of you before, because I'm in the States, and in the very deep south of the States, they probably wouldn't let you broadcast. I've enjoyed hearing from you tonight and some of the insight about the programming. And we'll be listening to you in the future for sure. As to your comments on education, I think Chris has pointed out a couple of times that critical thinking is the most important thing that can be taught to these kids today. I have no clue what it is. And I was fortunately brought up with critical thinking in education as well as my home life. So I find that the things that I have to listen to on podcasts, at least the ones that I have fallen into in dates, have been extremely disappointing and mainly very right-wing political issues. So I think I'll be listening to the Canadians a lot more now.
Well, that's music to my ears, Blue, and thanks very much. And much love to our American neighbors. It's kind of funny you said they might not let me do this in the southern states. I mean, you have no frame of reference here, but my firing. My dismissal from terrestrial radio, I had a pretty prominent talk show, was very politically driven. And so I have some experience actually in that regard. And one of the beautiful things about what I'm doing now is that they can't stop you. We're independent. We're Azure and audience supported. We have a Patreon and we have a great roster of advertisers that believe in what we're doing. And, and so that's one of the things that makes it really great. I totally agree with you 100%. With regards to critical thinking. I think that's so important. This is a true story. I had this conversation with my son literally 2 hours ago. He's 6 years old and he's in the vehicle with me and we're driving in silence. And he says, "Dad, what does it mean to agree to disagree?" And we just had this like amazing. I talked to him about it in the context of I think that the blue crayon is the best color and he thinks the red crayon is the best color, and we both might be right. And it really doesn't matter, and it's not worth arguing about. So we will agree to disagree. And we, but I just love that at 6 years old, that's something that's already on his radar.
Well, you obviously have a forward-thinking son at 6.
Yeah.
Who is going to give you a lot of trouble in the coming years.
Oh, I am expecting, if the universe has a sense of humor, I am expecting this wonderful young boy to put me through the ringer.
Sounds like. And
yeah.
Well, a good night to all the puppies. Blue has shut my chair, so I'm walking around trying to find someplace to sit down. But a good night to Bunsen and Beaker, and I missed the other two.
Moses and Monroe. They send a good night right back to
you. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
One thing that I hope everybody will be happy on is a lot of the science teachers, we've made critical thinking like a big part of how we teach. Just because of the COVID misinformation nonsense, like that's really brought all that to the forefront. Every week in my class, we pick something and we pick it apart. Like, is this truthful? Where can you fact check this? Like a couple days ago, it was about the nonsense about luciferase, that the vaccine has luciferase in it. It doesn't, and we were like, well, how could you figure out what that is? Which I think needs to be sometimes more important than the curriculum we're supposed to teach. So just for the folks that are listening, the educators, we're trying. All right. Well, we'll end. Ryan, you've been such a great guest tonight. Thank you for joining us for Spaces Unleashed. Everybody give Ryan a follow before we shut the spaces down, because you can get to his podcast through his website. And it's basically your name, Real Talk with Ryan Jespersen. So it's pretty fine. So please think about giving Ryan a listen. It's a great show. And for me personally, Ryan, my role as an educator and running this wholesome Twitter account, I've wanted to get angry and say some things that I can't say. And you've been that person that has said the things that I cannot say in front of my students, or I cannot say as Bunsen and Beaker. So thank you.
Yeah, well, that's my cross to bear, I suppose, and I accept it. And it's been, you reached out to me about doing this, if I remember correctly, about a couple of months ago, I think. And so I've really been looking forward to it. I can only have my Twitter Spaces debut once, and I will be honored that it was with you. And I love what you're doing. Your audience has clearly proven itself to be engaged and just really insightful. And this has been a great experience. And thank you for having me.